Major Daniel Danny Rodriguez had always prided himself on reading people. After 12 years in the Army, including 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq, he could spot trouble from a mile away. He could identify a threat in a crowded marketplace, sense when someone was lying during interrogations, and pick out fellow military personnel even when they were in civilian clothes. So when he walked into the small coffee shop near Fort Braxton on that rainy Tuesday morning, he was confident he knew exactly what he was looking at. The woman at the corner table was clearly a civilian. Everything about her screamed it. Her long auburn hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, not pulled back in the regulation styles he was used to seeing on base. She wore a flowing floral dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, paired with delicate sandals that showed off perfectly manicured toes. Her makeup was flawless. Her jewelry sparkled in the morning light streaming through the window, and she carried herself with the kind of relaxed grace that only came from never having marched in formation or stood at attention for hours on end. Danny found himself staring longer than he should have as he waited in line for his usual black coffee. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she represented something he had been missing for years. Normalcy, softness, a life outside the rigid structure of military protocol and endless deployment cycles. She was reading what looked like a romance novel, occasionally smiling at whatever was happening on the page, completely absorbed in her fictional world. When she looked up and caught him staring, Danny felt his face flush with embarrassment. Instead of looking away annoyed, as he expected, she smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile that reached her green eyes and made something in his chest tighten with an emotion he had not felt in a very long time. Sorry, he mouthed silently, pointing to himself and making an apologetic face. She laughed quietly and shook her head, as if to say it was no problem at all. Then, she did something that surprised him even more. She gestured to the empty chair across from her table. Danny looked around the crowded coffee shop. Every other table was full, and there was a line of people waiting for seats. It was a practical invitation, he told himself. She was just being polite, sharing her table with a stranger because the place was packed. It had nothing to do with the fact that he had been staring at her like a love-struck teenager. He grabbed his coffee and walked over, his heart beating faster than it had during his last firefight in Kandahar. "Thank you," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I'm Danny, by the way." "Sarah," she replied, closing her book and giving him her full attention. "You look like you could use some caffeine." Danny laughed, realizing he must look as tired as he felt. He had been up until 3 in the morning reviewing mission reports for the joint training exercise his unit would be running next week. Long night. Work stuff. "What kind of work keeps you up that late?" Sarah asked, taking a sip of what looked like some kind of fancy latte with extra foam. This was always the tricky part. Danny had learned over the years that telling women he was military had one of 2 effects. Either they were immediately turned off by the idea of dating someone who could be deployed at any moment, or they were so turned on by the uniform and the danger that they fell in love with an idea rather than with him as a person. He had been burned by both types. "I work in logistics," he said, which was not technically a lie. As a special operations officer, logistics were a huge part of his job. Planning routes, coordinating supplies, managing personnel. He just left out the part about those supplies often including explosives and those personnel being elite soldiers trained to kill. "That sounds complicated," Sarah said with genuine interest. "What kind of logistics?" "Transportation, mostly. Making sure things get where they need to go when they need to be there." Again, not exactly false. He did spend a lot of time making sure his teams got to their targets safely and on schedule. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I can imagine that would be stressful, especially if people are depending on you to get it right." The way she said it, with such understanding and without pushing for more details, made Danny relax in a way he had not in months. Usually, when he was vague about his job, people either lost interest quickly or became more persistent in their questioning. Sarah seemed content to let him share what he was comfortable sharing. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you do when you're not reading?" He glanced at the cover of her book and tried not to smile. "Romance novels and coffee shops." Sarah laughed, and the sound was like music. "I work in human resources," she said. "Not nearly as exciting as logistics, I'm sure, but I enjoy it. I like helping people solve problems and figure out how to work together better." Human resources. Danny nodded, filing that information away. It made sense. She had a warmth and approachability that would make her good at dealing with workplace conflicts and personnel issues. Probably worked for some corporate office downtown, dealing with vacation requests and employee evaluations. Safe, predictable, civilian. They talked for over an hour. Danny found himself sharing stories about his childhood in Texas, his love of old movies, and his dream of someday opening a small ranch where he could raise horses. Sarah told him about growing up in North Carolina, her passion for hiking and photography, and her secret ambition to write a novel someday. She was funny and smart and kind, laughing at his jokes even when they were not particularly clever and asking thoughtful questions that showed she was really listening to his answers. When Sarah finally glanced at her watch and said she had to get to work, Danny felt a stab of disappointment that surprised him with its intensity. He had not realized how much he had been enjoying their conversation until it was ending. Could I? He started, then stopped. What was he doing? He barely knew this woman. She was clearly way out of his league. She probably had a boyfriend, or at least dozens of men asking her out every week. Never mind. Could you what? Sarah asked gently, gathering her things. Could I maybe see you again sometime? The words tumbled out before he could stop them. I mean, if you would want to. Maybe dinner? Or another coffee? Sarah's smile lit up her entire face. I would like that very much. They exchanged phone numbers, and Danny watched her walk away, admiring the confident way she moved through the crowded coffee shop and out onto the busy street. She turned back once to wave at him through the window, and he waved back like an idiot, probably grinning ear to ear. For the first time in years, Danny found himself thinking about something other than military operations and deployment schedules. As he drove back to base, he was already planning what he would wear on their date, where he might take her, what they might talk about. He felt like a new person, like someone who existed outside of his rank and his duties and his carefully controlled military life. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah less than an hour after they parted ways. Thank you for the lovely conversation. Looking forward to dinner. How about Friday? Danny typed back immediately. Friday sounds perfect. I'll pick you up at 7. Can't wait, came her reply, followed by a little smiley face emoji that made him laugh out loud in his office. Over the next few days, Danny found himself checking his phone constantly, hoping for more texts from Sarah. She was not the type to play games, he discovered. She texted him good morning each day, shared funny stories from her work, and asked about his day with genuine interest. Their conversations flowed easily, whether they were discussing their favorite foods or debating the merits of different hiking trails in the area. Friday could not come fast enough. Danny spent an embarrassing amount of time getting ready, changing shirts 3 times and second-guessing his choice of restaurant. He had settled on a small Italian place downtown that was nice enough to be impressive, but casual enough that Sarah would not feel overdressed in whatever she chose to wear. When he picked her up at her apartment, Danny was struck again by how beautiful she was. She wore a simple black dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated, with small silver earrings that caught the light when she moved. But more than her physical beauty, what struck him was how at ease she seemed. There was no nervous energy, no awkward small talk. She greeted him with a warm hug and a genuine smile, as if they had known each other for years instead of days. Dinner was even better than their coffee shop conversation had been. Sarah was easy to talk to, quick to laugh, and genuinely interested in hearing about his life. She asked about his family, his hobbies, his dreams for the future. When he told her about his idea for the horse ranch, she did not laugh or suggest it was impractical. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions about what kind of horses he would want to raise and whether he had ever considered offering riding lessons to children. I think that sounds wonderful, she said over dessert. There's something so peaceful about being around horses. They're such intuitive animals. You ride? Danny asked, surprised. I used to, when I was younger. My grandmother had a small farm outside Charlotte, and I spent my summers there. Some of my best memories are of riding through the fields early in the morning when the mist was still rising off the grass. The image of Sarah on horseback, her hair flowing behind her as she rode through misty fields, was so vivid and appealing that Danny almost forgot to respond. Here was yet another thing they had in common, another piece of evidence that maybe this connection he was feeling was not just one-sided. When he walked her to her door at the end of the evening, Danny was not sure what to expect. They had not talked about physical intimacy, had barely touched except for that initial hug. He was prepared to settle for a handshake or maybe a quick kiss on the cheek. What he was not prepared for was the way Sarah turned to face him on her doorstep, stepped closer, and looked up at him with those incredible green eyes. "I had a really wonderful time tonight," she said softly. "So did I," Danny replied, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "I hope we can do this again soon. How about tomorrow?" The words were out before he could think about them. "I mean, if you're not busy. We could go for a hike, or maybe check out that farmer's market you mentioned." Sarah laughed, but not in a mocking way. "I'd love that. But maybe we should pace ourselves a little bit." Danny felt his face heat with embarrassment. "Right, of course. Sorry, I don't want to seem too eager." "Danny," Sarah said, reaching up to touch his face gently. "I like eager. But I also like anticipation." Then she kissed him, soft and sweet and perfect, before disappearing inside her apartment with a smile and a promise to call him the next day. Danny drove home in a daze, replaying every moment of the evening in his mind. He had not felt this way about anyone in years, maybe ever. Sarah was everything he had not known he was looking for. Beautiful, yes, but also kind and funny and easy to be with. She made him want to be a better version of himself, to think about a future that included more than just the next mission or the next deployment. For the first time since joining the Army, Danny found himself wondering what it would be like to have a normal relationship with a normal woman who lived a normal life. Sarah represented everything peaceful and stable and good about civilian life. She was his escape from the intensity and danger of his real job, his reminder that there was a world outside of military operations and classified briefings. He had no idea that the woman he was falling for was about to turn his entire understanding of his life upside down. Over the next 3 weeks, Danny fell harder than he had ever fallen for anyone in his life. Sarah became the bright spot in his increasingly demanding schedule. Between their coffee shop meeting and now, his unit had been assigned to a joint training operation with several intelligence agencies, which meant longer hours, more classified briefings, and higher stress levels than usual. But no matter how exhausting his day was, talking to Sarah made everything better. They settled into a comfortable rhythm of texting throughout the day and seeing each other 2 or 3 times a week. Sarah never complained when he had to cancel plans at the last minute due to work emergencies, and she never pushed him for details about why his schedule was so unpredictable. She seemed to understand that his job was demanding without needing to know the specifics. Danny found himself creating elaborate explanations for his absences. When he had to miss their planned Saturday hike because of an emergency training exercise, he told her there had been a crisis with a delayed shipment that required his immediate attention. When he could not answer his phone for 12 hours straight because his unit was running communication drills, he explained that he had been in back-to-back meetings with difficult clients. The lies came easier than he expected, partly because they were not entirely untrue and partly because Sarah never seemed suspicious of his explanations. What surprised him most was how much he enjoyed the mundane aspects of their relationship. Grocery shopping together on Sunday mornings became his favorite weekly activity. Sarah had a way of making even the most ordinary tasks feel special. She would link her arm through his as they walked through the produce section, debating the merits of different types of apples and sharing childhood stories about helping their mothers cook. She made him laugh by doing silly voices for the products on their shopping list and turned their mundane errands into adventures. Danny loved watching Sarah in her natural environment. She was endlessly patient with slow cashiers and rude customers. She always had exact change and coupons organized in a small wallet that she kept in her purse. She remembered the names of the regular employees at their favorite stores and asked about their families. Everything about her radiated the kind of gentle competence that came from a well-ordered, predictable life. In quiet moments, Danny sometimes felt a pang of guilt about how much he was hiding from her. Sarah had been completely open with him about her life, introducing him to her friends, inviting him to join her book club, even suggesting he meet her parents when they came to visit next month. Meanwhile, he had not told a single person in his unit that he was seeing someone. The military world and the civilian world felt so separate in his mind that bringing them together seemed impossible. The closest he came to telling her the truth was during a conversation about his exercise routine. Sarah had commented on how fit he was, running her hands appreciatively over his arms and chest while they cuddled on her couch after dinner. You must have an amazing gym membership, she said teasingly. Or really good genes. I work out at a facility near my office, Danny said, which was true. The base gym was technically near his office. It's pretty intense. Like CrossFit intense. Something like that. He pulled her closer, hoping to distract her from the topic. What about you? How do you stay in such incredible shape? Sarah laughed and allowed herself to be distracted. But Danny noticed she had a thoughtful look in her eyes that made him wonder if she was starting to pick up on the inconsistencies in his stories. The breaking point came during their 4th week of dating. Danny had been looking forward to their planned dinner and movie night all week. His unit was in the middle of intensive preparation for the joint training exercise, which meant 14-hour days and constant stress. The thought of spending a quiet evening with Sarah, ordering takeout, and watching something mindless on Netflix was the only thing getting him through the endless briefings and equipment checks. But at 4:30 on Friday afternoon, just as he was preparing to leave base, Colonel Martinez called an emergency meeting. Intelligence had received new information about the training scenario, and they needed to completely revise their operational plans. Danny knew immediately that his evening with Sarah was not going to happen. He texted her from outside the conference room. Work emergency. Have to cancel tonight. Rain check. Her response came back quickly. Of course. Don't worry about me. Handle what you need to handle. We can do movie night tomorrow instead. But Saturday brought another crisis, and then Sunday, and by the time Danny was finally free, it had been a week since he had seen Sarah in person. When he called her Monday evening to apologize and try to reschedule, she was understanding as always, but he could hear something different in her voice, a distance that had not been there before. It's fine, Danny, she said when he apologized for the 3rd time. I understand that work is demanding, but maybe we could talk about ways to manage the unpredictability a little better. I don't need to know details about your job, but it would help if I had a better sense of when these emergencies might happen. Danny felt trapped. How could he explain that military operations did not follow predictable schedules? That sometimes he got called in at 2 in the morning for missions he could not even acknowledge existed? That the training exercise his unit was preparing for was actually a simulation of infiltrating a terrorist compound, not coordinating the delivery of office supplies. It's just a particularly busy period, he said finally. Things should calm down in a few weeks. There was a long pause. Danny, can I ask you something? Sure. Are you married? The question hit him like a physical blow. What? No. Sarah, no, I'm not married. Why would you think that? I don't think that, she said quickly. Not really. It's just that the constant cancellations, the vague explanations about work, the way you're never available during certain hours. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were sneaking around to see me. Danny's heart was racing. She was starting to get suspicious, but for all the wrong reasons. In a way, the idea that she thought he might be cheating was almost worse than if she had guessed the truth about his military service. At least if she knew he was a soldier, she would understand why he had to be secretive. Thinking he was unfaithful made him seem like a completely different kind of person than he actually was. Sarah, I swear to you, I am not seeing anyone else. You're the only woman I'm interested in. The only woman I want to be with. Then, help me understand what's going on, she said softly. Because I'm starting to feel like I'm dating someone I don't really know. Danny closed his eyes, fighting with himself. Every instinct told him to maintain operational security, to keep his military life separate from his personal life. But every feeling in his heart told him that he was about to lose the best thing that had happened to him in years. What if I told you that my job is more complicated than I've been letting on, he said slowly. How complicated? The kind of complicated where I can't always explain why I have to cancel plans or why I can't answer my phone for hours at a time. There was another long pause. Danny, are you in some kind of trouble? Legal trouble? No, he said quickly. Nothing like that. I'm not doing anything illegal or dangerous or unethical. It's the kind of work where discretion is really important. Like classified government work. Danny's breath caught. He had not expected her to make that leap so quickly. Ah, yes. Something like that. Are you FBI? No. CIA? No. Sarah, I'm not a spy, he said, trying to make light of it. I'm really just in logistics. It's just government logistics instead of private sector logistics. He could hear her thinking on the other end of the line. That makes more sense, she said finally. Why didn't you just tell me that from the beginning? Because I've learned that when you tell people you work for the government, they either get really excited about the idea of dating someone with security clearance, or they get really nervous about dating someone with security clearance. I wanted you to get to know me as just Danny, not as Danny who works for the government. It was not the whole truth, but it was closer than he had gotten before. Sarah seemed to accept it, and some of the tension in her voice dissolved. For future reference, she said, I'm much more attracted to honest men than I am to mysterious government men. You don't have to tell me classified information, but you can trust me with the basic framework of your life. I know, Danny said. I'm sorry I wasn't more upfront from the beginning. Are there other things you haven't told me? Danny thought about his rank, his combat experience, the fact that he carried a weapon to work every day and knew 17 different ways to kill someone with his bare hands. He thought about the medals in his bedroom dresser drawer and the nightmares he sometimes woke up from screaming. Nothing that changes who I am as a person, he said finally. Nothing that affects how I feel about you or what I want with you. Okay, Sarah said, and he could hear her smiling. I can work with that. But Danny, yeah. Next time work keeps you busy for a week straight, just tell me that's what's happening. I'd rather know you're swamped and unavailable than wonder if you're losing interest. I'm definitely not losing interest, Danny said. If anything, I'm more interested every day. Good, Sarah said warmly. Because I was starting to plan our future together, and it would be really inconvenient if you turned out to be a flight risk. Danny laughed, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. What kind of future plans? Well, I was thinking we could start by having dinner tomorrow night. You know, assuming the government doesn't need you to save the world. Even if they do, I'm telling them it'll have to wait, Danny said. I have a very important date with a very important woman. Flatterer, Sarah said, but he could hear the pleasure in her voice. After they hung up, Danny sat in his truck in the base parking lot, staring at his phone. He had managed to navigate the conversation without revealing anything truly classified, but he was not naive enough to think this would be the last time the subject came up. Sarah was too smart and too observant to be satisfied with vague explanations indefinitely. The real problem was that he was falling in love with her. Not just attracted to her or enjoying spending time with her, but genuinely, deeply in love in a way that made him want to plan a future together. And that meant he was eventually going to have to tell her the truth about who he really was. He thought about how she would react when she found out he was not just a government logistics coordinator, but a special operations major who had spent the better part of a decade in active combat zones. Would she be proud of his service, or would she be terrified of the danger he faced? Would she be impressed by his rank and his decorations, or would she feel betrayed by how much he had hidden from her? Danny started his truck and headed home, trying not to think about the stack of classified mission files waiting on his desk or the joint training exercise that would consume the next 3 weeks of his life. For now, he had managed to preserve his relationship with Sarah without compromising operational security. He would deal with the bigger questions later. What he did not know was that Sarah was sitting in her own apartment, staring at her own phone, and asking herself very similar questions about the man she was falling in love with. Because Sarah had not been entirely honest either, and the conversation they had made her realize that her own secrets were about to become much more complicated to maintain. Sarah Chun had been keeping secrets her entire adult life. As a senior intelligence analyst for the Defense Intelligence Agency, secrecy was not just part of her job, it was woven into every aspect of her existence. She had learned to compartmentalize her life so completely that sometimes she almost forgot which version of herself she was supposed to be in any given moment. The woman Danny knew as Sarah, the HR professional who loved romance novels and farmers markets, was not exactly a lie. She did love romance novels, and she did enjoy spending Sunday mornings browsing local produce stands. But the truth was infinitely more complicated. The HR work she occasionally mentioned involved analyzing personnel files of suspected enemy agents. The difficult clients she sometimes dealt with were foreign intelligence operatives, and the training seminars that occasionally kept her busy on weekends were actually classified briefings about emerging threats to national security. When she had first spotted Danny in the coffee shop, Sarah had been taking a rare break from preparing for the same joint training exercise that was consuming his time. She had been at Fort Braxton for 3 days already, working with military personnel to design realistic scenarios that would test both combat operations and intelligence gathering capabilities. She was scheduled to return to the base that afternoon for another round of planning sessions. The irony was not lost on her that she had been attracted to Danny precisely because she thought he was a civilian. After years of dating within the intelligence community, where every conversation was carefully parsed for operational security violations, and every relationship came with extensive background checks, the idea of being with someone outside her world had been incredibly appealing. Danny represented the same thing to her that she represented to him: normalcy, simplicity, and escape from the constant pressure of classified work. When he told her he worked in logistics, she had been charmed by the ordinariness of it. When he was vague about details, she had assumed it was because his work was boring, not because it was classified. The first hint that things might be more complicated came during their second date. Danny had mentioned being in excellent shape because of his gym near work, but when he rolled up his sleeves while they were washing dishes together, Sarah noticed scars on his forearms that looked suspiciously like the kind of injuries that came from combat training or field operations. She had similar scars herself, carefully hidden under makeup and strategically chosen clothing. Then, there was his phone. Sarah had been trained to notice details, and she could not help but observe that Danny's phone was never far from his hand, that he checked it constantly even when trying to appear relaxed, and that he had the kind of quick, automatic responses to unexpected sounds that came from military or law enforcement training. When a car backfired during one of their walks, he had immediately stepped in front of her and scanned the area with the systematic precision of someone trained in threat assessment. But the real revelation came during the week when Danny had to cancel their plans repeatedly due to work emergencies. Sarah had been dealing with her own work crisis during the same period, preparing for a critical phase of the joint training exercise. She had been at Fort Braxton nearly every day, working late into the night with military personnel to finalize operational scenarios. It was during one of those late-night planning sessions that she saw him. Sarah had been leaving the secure conference room, where she had spent the evening briefing senior officers about the intelligence components of the training exercise. She was exhausted, looking forward to getting home, and texting Danny goodnight, when she spotted a familiar figure striding down the hallway in full military uniform. For a moment, she thought she was seeing things. The man walking toward her had Danny's height, Danny's build, Danny's distinctive way of moving. But he was wearing army fatigues with major's insignia and carrying himself with the unmistakable bearing of a career military officer. He was deep in conversation with two other soldiers, discussing something about operational parameters and equipment specifications. Sarah ducked into an empty office, her heart racing. It could not be Danny. Her Danny worked in civilian logistics for some government contractor. Her Danny had never mentioned military service, had never displayed the kind of bearing or vocabulary that came from years in uniform. Her Danny was supposed to be her escape from the world of classified operations and military precision. But, as the man passed by her hiding place, she got a clear look at his profile. It was definitely Danny. Her civilian logistics coordinator was actually Major Daniel Rodriguez of the U.S. Army, and based on the conversation she had overheard, he was one of the senior officers involved in planning the exact same training exercise she had been working on. Sarah sat in the empty office for 20 minutes after Danny had passed, trying to process what she had discovered. Her first reaction was anger. He had lied to her about something fundamental about who he was. Her second reaction was confusion. Why would he hide his military service? Most soldiers were proud of their careers, especially officers who had clearly reached his level of seniority. Her third reaction was a terrible irony that made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. She had fallen in love with a military officer while pretending to be a civilian, and he had fallen in love with her while pretending to be a civilian. They were both living elaborate lies, both hiding the most important aspects of their professional lives from each other. The man she thought represented escape from her classified world was actually deeply embedded in the same world she inhabited. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself analyzing their relationship through the lens of her new knowledge. Suddenly, Danny's unpredictable schedule made perfect sense. His vague explanations about work emergencies were not the boring logistics crises she had imagined, but actual military operations that he could not discuss for security reasons. His physical fitness, his careful attention to his surroundings, his automatic protective instincts, all of it fit the profile of an experienced combat officer. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much they had both been hiding. Every conversation they had shared was built on layers of deception, not because either of them intended to be manipulative, but because they were both so accustomed to maintaining operational security that lying had become second nature. Sarah found herself wondering what else she did not know about him. What was his specialty within the Army? How many deployments had he completed? What kind of operations was he involved in? The Danny she knew was gentle and thoughtful, someone who brought her flowers and remembered how she liked her coffee. But the Major Rodriguez she had glimpsed at Fort Braxton moved with the controlled precision of someone who had seen combat, someone who had made life and death decisions under pressure. The hardest part was pretending that nothing had changed. When Danny called to apologize for missing their dinner date, Sarah had to bite her tongue to keep from asking him how the training exercise planning was going. When he explained that his work crisis might last another few days, she had to resist the urge to tell him that she understood completely because she was dealing with the same crisis from the other side. The conversation where Danny had finally admitted to doing classified government work had been both a relief and a new source of anxiety for Sarah. He was clearly trying to be more honest with her, but he was still so far from the complete truth that she felt like they were speaking in code. When he assured her that his work was not dangerous or unethical, she wanted to tell him that she knew exactly how demanding and stressful classified government work could be, because she lived that reality every day. But admitting that would mean revealing her own deception, and Sarah was not ready for that conversation yet. She had spent years building her cover identity as a mild-mannered HR professional. She had friends and neighbors and a whole community that knew her as civilian Sarah, not as DIA analyst Dr. Sarah Chun, who held top-secret clearance and specialized in counterintelligence operations. The irony was that now that she knew the truth about Danny's military background, she was more attracted to him, not less. The combination of his professional competence and his personal gentleness was incredibly appealing. She respected his service and his dedication to his country. She was impressed by his ability to maintain operational security while still being emotionally available to her. But she was also terrified of what would happen when he found out that she had been lying too. Would he feel betrayed by her deception? Would he be angry that she had let him believe she was a naive civilian, while she was actually cleared to know information that even most military officers were not authorized to access? The situation became even more complicated when Sarah realized that their respective roles in the upcoming training exercise meant they would inevitably encounter each other in their professional capacities. She was scheduled to observe several of the operational scenarios as part of her assessment of intelligence integration protocols. Danny, based on what she had overheard, was one of the primary planning officers for those same scenarios. There was a very real possibility that they would run into each other during the exercise. Sarah would be in her professional capacity as a DIA analyst, probably wearing her government-issued identification badge, and clearly established as someone with high-level security clearance. Danny would be in his role as a military officer, commanding troops, and managing complex operations. The thought of their two worlds colliding in such a dramatic way made Sarah's stomach churn with anxiety. How would they explain their connection to their colleagues? How would they maintain their professional objectivity during the exercise when they were emotionally involved with each other? How would they handle the revelation that they had both been living lies for the entire duration of their relationship? Sarah began to understand why so many people in the intelligence and military communities ended up dating within their professional circles. The constant need for secrecy, the unpredictable schedules, the inability to fully explain their work to outsiders. All of it was much easier to navigate with someone who understood the lifestyle from the inside. But she also realized that what she felt for Danny went beyond convenience or professional compatibility. She was genuinely in love with him, not just with the idea of having a relationship with someone who understood her work demands. She loved his laugh, his kindness, his integrity, his dreams of raising horses someday. She loved the way he listened when she talked, and the way he made her feel beautiful and valued. Those qualities had nothing to do with his military service or his security clearance. The question was whether those feelings would survive the revelation that their entire relationship had been built on mutual deception. Sarah wanted to believe that their connection was strong enough to weather the storm of truth that was coming. But she had seen too many relationships destroyed by the pressures of classified work to be entirely optimistic. As the date of the joint training exercise approached, Sarah found herself caught between hope and dread. Part of her was excited about the possibility of finally being honest with Danny about who she really was. Part of her was terrified that discovering the truth about each other would change everything between them in ways that could not be undone. What she did not know was that Danny was wrestling with exactly the same fears and hopes, and that the training exercise that was causing them both so much anxiety was about to force a confrontation that would either destroy their relationship completely or transform it into something deeper and more honest than either of them had imagined possible. The joint training exercise, codenamed Operation Crosswind, was scheduled to begin on a Monday morning in early October. Danny had been at Fort Braxton since 5 a.m., reviewing final preparations with his team and conducting last-minute equipment checks. The operation would simulate a complex counterterrorism scenario involving multiple agencies and would test both combat readiness and interagency intelligence coordination. As the commanding officer for the primary assault team, Danny's responsibilities were extensive. He needed to coordinate with intelligence analysts, manage his soldiers, and ensure that the training objectives were met while maintaining realistic operational parameters. It was exactly the kind of high-pressure, detail-oriented work that he excelled at, but his concentration kept slipping as he thought about Sarah. He had barely seen her in the past 2 weeks due to his preparation schedule, and their conversations had been limited to brief phone calls and text messages. She had been understanding as always, but Danny could sense something different in her tone. A distance that he attributed to his prolonged absence, but that made him anxious nonetheless. Danny was reviewing tactical maps in the command center when Colonel Martinez approached with a stack of personnel files. "Rodriguez, I need you to meet with the DIA analyst who'll be observing your scenarios today," Martinez said. "She's here to assess how well we're integrating intelligence protocols with field operations. Make sure your team gives her full access and cooperation." Danny nodded, accepting the files without looking at them closely. Interagency cooperation was always a critical component of joint exercises, and he was used to working with intelligence personnel. "When does she want to start the briefing?" "She's already here. Conference room BDR. Sarah Chun, very highly regarded analyst. This assessment could affect future funding for joint operations, so make a good impression." Danny's blood went cold. The name hit him like a physical blow, but he managed to keep his expression neutral as Colonel Martinez walked away. Sarah Chun. It could not be a coincidence. Sarah had told him her last name was Williams, but Chun could be her maiden name, or a professional name, or she had been lying about more than just her career. Danny walked toward conference room B in a daze, his mind racing through possibilities. Maybe it was a different Sarah Chun. Maybe he was jumping to conclusions. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation that did not involve the woman he was falling in love with having lied about every fundamental aspect of her identity. But when he opened the door to the conference room, there was no doubt. Sarah was standing at the far end of the room, studying a tactical display on the wall. She was wearing a crisp navy blue suit instead of her usual flowing dresses, and her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She wore minimal makeup and had a government-issued identification badge clipped to her jacket. Everything about her posture and bearing radiated professional authority and competence. She looked up when he entered, and Danny saw his own shock reflected in her green eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with tension and disbelief. "Major Rodriguez," Sarah said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "I was not expecting to see you here." "Dr. Chun," Danny replied, closing the door behind him. "I think we need to talk." They stared at each other across the conference table, both clearly struggling to process what was happening. Danny tried to reconcile the woman standing in front of him with the Sarah he thought he knew. This was not the gentle HR professional who laughed at his jokes and dreamed of writing novels. This was a highly trained intelligence analyst whose security clearance probably exceeded his own. "How long have you known?" Sarah asked quietly. "I just found out your real name 2 minutes ago," Danny said. "But I'm guessing you've known about me for longer than that. Sarah's face flushed slightly. I saw you here last week, during the planning sessions, and you didn't think to mention it. I could ask you the same question, Sarah said, some fire creeping into her voice. How long were you planning to keep pretending you work in civilian logistics? Danny sat down heavily in one of the conference chairs. I don't know. I was trying to figure out how to tell you the truth without compromising operational security. By lying about everything? You lied too, Danny pointed out. Human resources? Really? I do work in human resources, Sarah said defensively. Personnel assessment is a big part of intelligence analysis. That's the biggest stretch I've ever heard. Despite the tension and anger in the room, Sarah's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Fine. It was a stretch. They sat in silence for several minutes, both clearly struggling with the enormity of what they had discovered about each other. Danny found himself studying Sarah's face, trying to identify which aspects of her personality had been genuine and which had been performance. The woman sitting across from him was clearly intelligent and competent, but was she still the same person who had shared her dreams and fears with him over countless dinners and coffee dates? So what now? Danny asked finally. Now we have a job to do, Sarah said, straightening in her chair and adopting a more professional tone. I'm here to observe your training scenarios and assess interagency cooperation protocols. You're here to run those scenarios. We're both professionals, and we can handle this situation professionally. Sarah, Dr. Chun, she corrected firmly. In this context, I'm Dr. Chun. Danny felt a stab of hurt at her formal tone, but he nodded. Dr. Chun, can we at least agree that we'll talk about this properly after the exercise is over? If there's anything left to talk about, Sarah said quietly. The next 8 hours were the most surreal of Danny's life. He found himself conducting military operations while the woman he loved sat in the background, taking notes and asking pointed questions about his decision-making processes. Sarah was clearly excellent at her job. Her questions were insightful, her observations were astute, and her understanding of military operations was sophisticated in ways that made Danny realize how much she had been holding back during their personal conversations. During the first scenario, a simulated hostage rescue operation, Sarah observed from the command center while Danny led his team through the tactical exercise. She asked detailed questions about how intelligence was being integrated into operational planning, how communication protocols worked between different agencies, and how field commanders made decisions when intelligence reports were incomplete or contradictory. Danny found himself responding to her questions with a level of detail and precision that he never used in their personal conversations. In this context, she was clearly his intellectual equal, someone who understood the complexities of his work in ways that even most of his fellow officers did not. The realization was both thrilling and devastating. During a break between scenarios, Danny approached Sarah while she was reviewing her notes. You're really good at this, he said quietly. Thank you, Sarah replied without looking up from her paperwork. How long have you been with DI? 8 years, she said. I have a PhD in international relations and specialized training in counterintelligence operations. Danny felt another piece of his understanding shift. A PhD. And you let me explain basic geopolitics to you like you were a college freshman. Sarah finally looked up at him, and for the first time all day, her professional mask slipped slightly. You were enjoying playing teacher. I didn't want to interrupt. You were humoring me. I was enjoying watching you get excited about something you're passionate about, Sarah said softly, even if I already knew everything you were telling me. The admission hung between them, loaded with implications about what had been real and what had been performance throughout their relationship. Sarah, Danny started, but she held up a hand to stop him. We can't do this here, she said, glancing around at the other personnel in the command center. Not now. The remaining scenarios passed in a blur of professional competence and personal tension. Danny found himself performing at his absolute best, partly because he wanted to impress Sarah with his abilities and partly because he was using the complex tactical problems as a distraction from the emotional chaos in his head. Sarah, for her part, was clearly struggling with the same conflicts. Danny caught her watching him during moments when she thought he was not looking, her expression mixing pride and sadness in ways that made his chest ache. The final scenario was the most complex, a multi-stage operation involving intelligence gathering, tactical assault, and hostage negotiation. Danny's team had to coordinate with FBI agents, CIA operatives, and local law enforcement while Sarah and other analysts provided real-time intelligence updates. It was during this exercise that Danny finally saw the full extent of Sarah's professional capabilities. When the scenario called for analysis of intercepted communications in multiple languages, Sarah seamlessly switched between English, Mandarin, and Arabic while providing tactical recommendations to the field teams. When complications arose that required immediate reassessment of enemy capabilities, she produced detailed analyses in minutes that would have taken most analysts hours to complete. Danny realized that he was not just in love with a woman who had been pretending to be a civilian. He was in love with one of the most competent intelligence professionals he had ever worked with, someone whose expertise complemented his own in ways that made their professional partnership as powerful as their personal connection had been. When the exercise finally concluded late that afternoon, Danny and Sarah found themselves alone in the conference room, both exhausted and emotionally drained. The formal debriefing had gone well. Sarah's assessment would clearly be positive, and the training objectives had been met successfully. But the personal reckoning they both knew was coming felt overwhelming. "We should probably talk about this," Danny said, loosening his tie and sinking into one of the conference chairs. "Yes, we should," Sarah agreed. She had removed her jacket and let her hair down, and suddenly, she looked more like the woman he had fallen in love with and less like the intimidating intelligence analyst she had been all day. "I don't even know where to start," Danny admitted. "Start with why you lied to me," Sarah said quietly. Danny considered his answer carefully. "Because I wanted to be with someone who could see me as more than just my job. I've dated women before who were either intimidated by the military lifestyle or who were only interested in the uniform and the danger. I wanted to find out if you could care about Danny the person, not Major Rodriguez the soldier." Sarah nodded slowly. "I can understand that. But, Danny, I need you to understand that I fell in love with you because of who you are as a person. Your integrity, your kindness, your dreams about the future. The fact that you're also a highly competent military officer doesn't change those feelings. If anything, it makes me respect you more." "What about you?" Danny asked. "Why did you lie?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "For similar reasons, I think. I wanted to be with someone who could love civilian Sarah, not Dr. Sarah Chun, who spends her days analyzing threat assessments and counterintelligence reports. I wanted to be someone's girlfriend, not someone's security risk." "Sarah," Danny said gently, "you could never be a security risk to me. And everything I love about you, your intelligence, your curiosity, your strength, all of that is still real, regardless of what you do for work." Tears were starting to gather in Sarah's eyes. "But what happens now? How do we build a relationship on honesty after starting with so many lies?" Danny stood up and moved to the chair next to hers. "We start over. We tell each other the truth about who we really are and what we really do, and we see if what we had was strong enough to survive reality." "What if it's not?" Sarah whispered. "Then we'll deal with that," Danny said, taking her hand. "But, Sarah, today I watched you work, really work, and I've never been more attracted to you in my life. You're brilliant and competent and amazing at what you do. The woman I saw today is everything I thought you were and more." Sarah squeezed his hand. "You were incredible today, too. Watching you lead your team, seeing how your soldiers respect and trust you, understanding the level of responsibility you carry every day. I'm so proud of who you are, Danny." "So maybe we can make this work," Danny said hopefully. "Maybe we can," Sarah agreed. "But it's going to be complicated. Dating within the intelligence and military communities is never simple." "Nothing worth having is ever simple," Danny replied. 6 months later, Danny and Sarah were planning their wedding. The ceremony would be held at a small chapel near Fort Braxton, with both military and intelligence community colleagues in attendance. Sarah's security clearance had been updated to reflect her relationship with Danny, and his had been similarly adjusted. They had spent months learning to be honest with each other about their work, their fears, and their dreams. The process had not always been easy, but it had resulted in a relationship built on genuine understanding and mutual respect. Danny never did build his horse ranch, but he and Sarah bought a small farm outside the city where they could escape the pressures of their demanding careers. Sarah never wrote her romance novel, but she discovered that living her own love story was more satisfying than any fiction could be. Their friends often joked that they were the only couple who had met by accident while both working on the same classified operation. But Danny and Sarah knew that some things were too important to be left to chance, and love was definitely one of them.